Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria. I'm a peer advisor here at the Office of Undergraduate Research Services, and today I'll be talking a bit about how to create an abstract. So, oh, here we go. The agenda for today is going into these three topics listed here. So they will be about what exactly an abstract is, the elements of an abstract, and then submitting an abstract. So first off, what is an abstract? So, an abstract is basically a short summary of your research paper. Is It is a condensed version and all of the work that you did during your time on this said research project with your faculty mentor. It is continuing the progress of this work, and you might be working on multiple projects with the same mentor, but we want to focus on you highlighting on your work and the results done in one specific project. And this is essentially done for students of all different disciplines. And oftentimes it is about a paragraph long, and depending on the requirements of the abstract, this can be more or less, but we would say it's an average of about a paragraph long. And this is available for all majors and for all different types of research. So, goals wise, the whole point of making an abstract is for one, to provide a snapshot of your research. It helps the reader decide if they want to continue reading and learning more about this said research. In general, it is helpful if your work is available to the public. Oftentimes, when you are in a symposium or if you're going to submit to any particular work, it is often done on a public platform. It is often well established, and you want to avoid like any predatory journals or any kinds of other works that you learn more about, and just anything that you want to apply to as well. And this is often helpful for people who want to learn more about your topic, who might not have ever heard your topic before, or just want to get an idea of what exactly it is about. And it is also helpful to those who are conducting research and are looking for specific subjects and wanting to see if your work is applicable to what they are studying. Because oftentimes research is not just applicable to just the professionals in your field, but also to potential PhD students, to fellow undergrad students. And so you can see that your research can be applicable to a wide range of people, not just within those of your lab or specific field of study. Preparing people for what to expect is often a second goal that is being done. It explains not just the purpose, but how the analysis of the research is conducted, but also talks about the implications and significance of your research. And finally, that highlights key points to remember. So oftentimes, research being conducted in your lab is just a smaller part of a bigger issue. And we can't solve all issues at the same time. So you often focus on one small aspect of that, and you come together with other individuals to help create a solution for the greater good and just to address the bigger problem at hand. And also, it just helps makes it more digestible by giving simplified list of details to point out where the research itself is actually making a change, if any. So here are some writing tips that I would suggest you take with you. And these are just some to just take note of. And you can apply this to not just writing abstracts, but also to academic writing and professional settings as well. So utilizing active voice is essentially saying that you are the subject of what you're talking about, and that the subject that you are focusing on is the central part of the message. It's compared to, and this is different from active voice, and this doesn't matter regardless of what tense you have. So, for example, example of active voice would be something like, I met my faculty for a meeting. That is active voice because the subject of the matter, which is you, is actively going out to doing an action, completing an action, engaging with something, compared to a passive voice, which would be, I was met by my faculty for a meeting. Now, oftentimes students don't write like this, but sometimes when you're writing it initially, it might come off that way because you yourself are not a part of that research process. But when you are submitting an abstract, it is quite common knowledge that people don't have a chance, or it's very rare for someone to stay for a project for the duration of its time of running, because some projects last way longer than just like one semester, which is like 3 to 4 months. They often last multiple years or even decades. So it really just depends on what you join. Avoid jargon. So jargon is basically fancy words that explain the same thing. Students don't want to sound as if they are unaware of what they're talking about, and they want to sound very, very scholarly. And while that's a great image to have, and that's a very important thing to do in practice, it's also important to know what it is you are talking about. So it is better to use simple words, but to construct them in a way that is still gets your message across, and you are able to be confident in what it is that you are saying. That is much more impressionable than being able to use big words and not knowing at all what they mean. And it is hard to tell at a first glance, but it is something that you can integrate more as you get more involved in research. Use formal diction. So essentially make sure that you have the correct grammar, spelling, punctuation. Also, things like defining the acronym before you actually say it is super important because it might be common knowledge in your field what a certain acronym is. But if you ask someone from a different field, from a different audience, from a different respective field, they have no idea what you're going to say. So STAR, for example, is actually a common interview question, right? And this is the way to address a situation, or how to show your problem-solving skills. And STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So oftentimes it's a great way to give a snapshot of what you're talking about, but if you don't define what it is you are sharing, it's just going to leave a lot of confusion. And you don't want to do that in an abstract or any academic writing. And finally, to write it in third person, you want to engage in this because a lot of times you're often writing for a formal report. It is not necessarily going to be focused on you, the writer, or on just the population you're focusing on. It's going to go through a lot of different eyes, a lot of different editors, a lot of different groups of people with different levels of expertise. So you want to make sure that these kinds of writings are remaining as neutral as possible or referred to as the third party, so a broader range of people can access in reading it. So now we're going to talk about the elements of an abstract. So this is a snapshot of what we will be talking about. It'll go into the purpose, context, methods, and results. And the results is going to be the most varying or the most broad of all four of these aspects because results talks about the end product of what you did in your research, and that will come a lot from the combination of the first three aspects. And there's no way to predict if what you are searching for is what you're going to get out of your research. But the two main categories of results we'll be talking about today focus on findings and implications. So we're going to talk about this by going into an overview of this research. So this is an abstract that was published in 2017. The details about it are listed below on the screen, and we are going to be using this as an example as we talk a little bit about the following four elements of an abstract. So, and you can see here that they're highlighted in different colors, and they'll be a little bit easier to read later on. So we have the purpose in pink, the context in green, the methodology in blue, and the results, which include the findings and implications, in yellow. And what is really helpful is to note is that even though you might notice that the results are longer, the purpose is shorter, I want to shout out to say that it doesn't really matter how long a certain section is. It's more so important that you include these different elements because you might not have a lot of results to talk about, or your context might be the main part of your research or what your research currently has developed or has currently had solidified because your project might be very new. So as long as you have these elements, it's okay if the length of them is a little bit different. Um, if you, certain abstracts have different word requirements, so, that might change up the size, but ultimately just make sure you have everything there. So first you want to introduce your research. So the purpose, first off, is the aims of the research. It's the main topic you want to address in your discussion when talking about what you've done on your project. They can be written as a question, hypotheses, or objective statement. These aims want to point out what it is that you are trying to achieve. So are you trying to fill a gap, address a new area of study, or do you want to talk about one that has very limited knowledge or very little knowledge, or is like a very new area of discovery? Are you also trying to just test out a new method on current techniques, or are you checking out existing theories and trying different methods to get to that same result. Basically, testing out what's already been verified with a new method that's come out. So, for example, here we can see that this is not a question per se, but so it's not as direct, but it is implied here in the research study that it is focusing on various causes for this trend of rising inequality of pay amongst couples and the relationship a little bit more on how this might be so, right? So it gives you where it is going and a little bit about what it is trying to address in the research, which is an area that a lot of people are commonly familiar with, but it's a little bit more on why we care about it. So the context is basically the background. What is it we are talking about? Like what aspect of our purpose are we addressing today? So we're going to talk about the field, describing details like what previous studies have done and discovered, which can show interest in the subject, and also utilize a literature review. So we're highlighting research that has previously done, research that is currently being conducted. What is the current state of research on this topic? Do we know a lot? Do we know a little? What kind of barriers were there when research was first being conducted? All of this is to highlight where your research is being a contribution to that field. Because that also helps with explaining for like funding. This also helps explain with its significance, just elicit a conversation. All of these help with that. It contextualizes the research project and basically helps highlights the origins of where it all started. So, for the example, when doing the introduction, depending on the topic, it can be pretty long or short. You might notice that for social sciences or humanities research, there are topics that are much more recognizable and easier to identify compared to STEM subjects. So, for example, this particular research is focusing on spouses and married partners. So, not a lot of context is needed because we talk about them a lot and you see them in your everyday life. But if you come to other subjects like proteins that might contribute to Alzheimer's disease, like you're not going to know the exact names of the proteins, but you might be able to identify Alzheimer's. So you're going to want to include this context here. And so oftentimes you want to connect it to either the environment or you want to connect it to a common disease or something that a much more broader audience can apply to their everyday lives if this is a potential difficulty to write about. So now you want to discuss how you got your data through your methods. So the method section is oftentimes the most distinguishable one. It's one of the reasons why you join your lab, right? Whether you want to do interviews or whether you want to work in a lab, this is the section to talk about all of that. The technology you use, the techniques applied, and the details of the study itself. You can include details about the demographics of the population of interest, also quantitative and qualitative data that was collected, gathered, and how was that done? And if you have not yet collected any data, you can detail about what you plan on doing in the future or what your PI or principal investigator, aka your faculty mentor, plans on doing in the future. So you can at least have something to write down as reference for if someone has a question about that. And even if you don't have an active role in the research of collecting data, maybe just because of just the kinds of procedures you'll have to do, that's totally okay because the faculty should still be talking you through, what it is they plan on doing, get you familiar with the technologies that are disposable for them to use so you have an idea of why you might need to collect data a certain way. So you can see here in this example, though you were not a part of this research, again, it highlights just in general where the data comes from, a little bit of how they analyze the data. And you can see in this example that it is a secondary source. So meaning the data was collected by someone else and it is made available for researchers or people of interest to look at it and create their own results from it. So if you conduct research by yourself or you are the one that is directly working on the data, that is primary data. And if you have access to databases like this one, which is the panel study of income dynamics, that would be an example of a secondary data source. And there's pros and cons to both, but essentially you want to have some kind of data to work with, and however you get that data is consistent, so that if you were to replicate the study again, that you can do so because these steps are made available, they're made clear, and they are done and repeated so often that your results it'd be difficult to contest your results. So now you're going to talk about your findings. You're going to showcase those results. This is the product of all the work that you have done and is a culmination of everything achieved in the method section. And as mentioned, this is where you distinguish a little bit more about your qualitative and quantitative data. This is the more polished version of all the calculations you've done. So surely you're going to have some kinds of hiccups, a lot of feedback with your teammates and your faculty mentor on how to actually create your results and what to gather from all of the numbers that you're going to have. And the most important thing about the findings is that it might be really significant data, but you still need to answer your research question. And if you don't do that, then it's essentially an incomplete abstract. And you can see here in the example that it acknowledges that the data collected shows that the method that they use is not sufficient or it's not enough to provide an answer to the research question that they had, which was to explain why married couples may not have like equal pay or why there's such a gap in pay. And then finally, we're going to talk about the implications, which is essentially the significance of your research. Now, we highlighted a little bit about its importance and the purpose and the context, but this is where you add the results and then you apply that to the purpose and context. It's often just one sentence, but you can go on a little bit more about it. It basically shows how this can impact the field of study, whether that is shaping a certain research project, whether it is the validity of a certain method, or whether it is the outlook of a certain health topic or discussion of a subject in general. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, and there's no one correct way. There might be a more favored outcome that you would have preferred, or a more ideal situation to help set you up for future projects, but you want to be able to connect again the results to the purpose. And if there is no specific data to go into detail about, or if it's still like a project that is ongoing, you can still talk about the next steps of this project or where this project is headed and how these results can still feed into future works. So in this example, as I just mentioned, it acknowledges that there is still inequality and that the metrics that they used was not the most ideal way to get there, but there is still different ways to still gather this data from what they got from their study, and they can still use that to guide a future study that can actually answer that question of why the gap is so severe in couples on pay. So now we're going to talk about submitting an abstract. So there are a lot of different submission opportunities, and there are a lot listed here, and let's talk about them a little bit more. So conferences like ABRCAMS and SACNAS, these are two conferences that you might not have heard about, but they're basically focusing more. The first one ABRCAMS is a little bit more on like scientists and doing biomedical research, and SACNAS is a nonprofit organization that hosts a conference for undergrad students that is a little bit more general, not just including scientists, but those from the social sciences as well. And there's a lot of conferences catered specifically to undergraduate students, and there's also one specific by discipline. So if you are focusing more on STEM research, focusing more on like the arts or more tech heavy work, are all different conferences for that. You can also submit for posters such as the Week of Research Scholarly Creative Art Activities, which is the Week of RISCA, and that is also held at Cal State Long Beach. You can also attend competitions. So we have the student research competition coming up in March, and you are able to attend that if you're interested. And this one's a little bit different because they'll require you to have a presentation. So it'll be similar to like a Google PowerPoint, and you'll have a panel where you'll have a Q&A, and preparation for that is a little bit more different compared to a poster, and you'll be able to weigh the pros and cons of those different formats as well. Journals are a little bit more field specific, and that'll be led at the guidance of your faculty advisor. And it'll also depend on aspects like funding, how competitive is the journal itself, how well known is the journal, and being able to identify predatory journals and legitimate journals, as well as journals that may not have like a pay barrier, because some articles might be made free to the public, but they cost thousands of dollars to actually do so. You can also just attend at your university. So I listed a couple of examples here, but you can always check out the Office of Research and Economic Development to learn more. So there are different guidelines that you should always keep in mind when doing research. So for one, check the requirements. So check out different submission details. You want to check out where it is you want to submit it. So if you need to email a specific person, if there is a specific application portal that you need to make an account for, as well as if you need to have like additional like steps being done, like the topic that you're doing, if it's a specific field that they require more so than others, again, because there might be discipline specific fields. You also want to check out additional paperwork. So, for example, if your faculty needs to send like a recommendation letter or some kind of mini questionnaire to verify that you're doing their research, travel forms, also just like payments for if you're doing hotels and you're out of state or if you're just out of the country, because research happens anywhere and any additional like miscellaneous or extra paperwork like that. But also one of the biggest things is the deadline because not only do you want to submit it on time, but you also want to have that abstract be written out fully so your mentor can give you feedback on it, but also it gives you a chance to plan out your poster because you're also going to be doing school and other responsibilities outside of research, and you want to give yourself ample time to be prepared and not just having everything written out, but also to mentally be prepared to actually answer questions and to also get yourself excited to being in a different space. When we talk about guidelines, we also want to consider audience members. We also want to think about where and when you're holding the presentation. So what it's different from having a presentation online versus in person because for one, if it's online, then you're going to be able to have a lot like less time worrying about how to actually get there. It's more so done like with a lot of online communication and you can do it anywhere you need to and you can still focus on your responsibilities. But you won't have as much engagement with your fellow presenters and your fellow students and fellow audience members. You're still able to do that, but online it's a little bit trickier compared to just walking up to someone in person. In person, especially if it's outside of your city or if it's outside the state, it might be very daunting. You might have other responsibilities, but you'll still have the chance to connect with people and also any other resources outside of the conference that they might make available for you at the time. So just checking if that conflicts with maybe like other things like school or just other things like that is also very important. But you also want to consider who are the listeners, who are the main people that are going to be not just reading your abstract, but listening to the work done as demonstrated in your abstract. There are different conferences that focus more on undergraduate students from all different disciplines. And then there are conferences that focus specifically on certain subjects, but at any college level. So whether that is post-grad, whether that's people with PhDs or professors. So considering all of that is very important because when you talk about your subject, you might need to be very, very general and very, very broad. You might need to add a lot more explanations about what it is you're talking about versus if it's more specific, then you need to talk a little bit more about why that field, might why your research in that field is going more in one direction compared to another direction. So a lot of different challenges like that might come about, but again, working with your faculty is key. So now we're going to talk about common struggles when writing an abstract. And there is an example here with a topic focusing on the motives for caffeine consumption in college students. So here we have an example where you might have a hard time getting started, right? It's like you don't know where to begin. This is your first time doing it. You have a time crunch, you have other assignments to write out. So one of the biggest things is, for one, when you get affiliated with a project or when you get assigned onto a research project, you're going to be given a lot of articles to get an idea of what it is you're doing. You're going to have access to files, whether that's on like on Google, whether that's on like Microsoft, whatever it is, you're going to have a backlog, a whole bunch of access to files that'll have details such as what the project's about, previous research done by previous students on the project, as well as the current status or current progress, often done in weekly meetings or current goals for future progress. So all of that is listed. And so what you can do is follow the template that was discussed on how to write an abstract, such as identifying the purpose, giving a little more context, identifying the different methods. Like even if it's not super fleshed out, writing a little bit of something in that area is better than nothing at all. And just writing it out. Because if you don't write anything out, there's nothing to grade. There's nothing to edit, there's nothing to fix and improve upon because there's just nothing there. It's best to have something to work with than nothing to work with. So just free writing it and going through the process of just being like, can I answer this question or do I know what this question is asking me about, is a good way to get started. Another common struggle with creating an abstract includes not enough development. So this is a problem more commonly seen if you are in a project that's newly developed. So if the project hasn't been out for very long, the faculty is trying it out for the first time. This might also just be because of the timing of which when you join, they maybe were doing research for a while, so they're still getting used to like all the new proceedings. Whatever it is, whatever the case, there's just not a lot to provide in the abstract to answer all the categories like context, methods, etc. So one of the things you want to do is to identify the gaps. You want to see where research has currently being done. And then you want to see how your research fits into the areas that have not been fully addressed or areas that don't have as much support. So, for example, we talked about the example of motives for caffeine consumption in college students. So, here in the example on the screen, it talks about the intake of caffeine from all sources and reasons. So, we focus specifically on motives, and that falls under reasons. But we didn't talk about sources or where do they get their caffeine from. So that, for example, gives a little bit more context. So not only do we still have a little bit of research talking about our topic, we are giving a little bit more to build off on that might not be directly related to motive, but it is still expanding on that discussion in another field that is still relevant and is still important to talk about, which is the sources. And so that's why the biggest thing to help lead into that is just utilizing literature. Being able to look at previous research helps guide why you are not doing a certain method or why you prefer, or why the faculty prefer to do a certain way compared to other methods. Another common struggle when writing an abstract is just not having any findings. This, again, might not just be because of when you join the project or where the project is at. Again, the project might be in the middle of collecting data and analyzing the data could take a really long time. Or it could also just be like the findings that you have, you're just not super familiar with, or the findings that you have to present, they don't provide a lot of context to the question that you have because there are some instances where faculty will have you join a project and they will ask you to create an abstract that is a little bit different from what you're doing. They'll give you a data set maybe, and then they'll have you create your own research project. And there are instances that you might not have enough to present based on what you currently have available. So it's always good to pull from other resources as long as they're applicable. So checking previous studies. This is basically an emphasis from the previous point, which is talking about how did people do it before and why did they do it before? And it just shows a little bit more about how in depth people can go into that respective study you want to go on. So when we're talking about different motives, you can see here on the right-hand side that there is a motives for caffeine consumption questionnaire. And that is basically a little survey that was conducted that focuses on motives for caffeine consumption. And this specifically had a verified instrument. So they had one specific technique that was validated and it was distributed. So you can use this as an explanation for why you use this particular tool compared to making a survey on your own, right? So like different methods like that are very important. But also you want to talk about inferring possible results. So depending on the current development of your project, you might not have enough time for when the deadline is due to present your abstract and actually getting the results fully fleshed out to actually present. And that is totally okay. Oftentimes, when you are doing abstracts, it is again a smaller snapshot of what you are presenting in your poster. So, when you are presenting your poster, it is going to talk a lot about the more refined details. It's going to be a lot longer because it is a whole bigger poster board compared to just one paragraph. And you'll have the time to talk about it then, but at least for the abstract, you can definitely talk about the trends of the results. So where you think it is going to end up based on, again, the context of previous literature and also the current status of the methods that your faculty is using. And you can also include your own reasoning as long as it is supported by literature as well. So, for example, we talked a lot about motives, and here from the questionnaire from the same source, they talked a lot about how they identified six different factors, right? And maybe our study itself focused on motives, but it doesn't include aspects like alertness or habit or mood, right? Like they might not include that. So, some research suggests that there are this many methods. Our data shows that we don't have that method, but if you combine it together, it shows that there is still a lot of interest in that subject, just in a different direction. And that still adds to research, and that makes your research a lot more interesting to learn about because not only are you adding something to research, but you are also like challenging it in a way that makes it a contribution and to create a discussion, which is what you want to do in research. Another big struggle that many students have is having faculty feedback with them. So, you're going to work on a project very early on, you have an idea of what you're doing, you have your assignments, and then you try to sign up for getting feedback, wanting to submit an abstract, and you already shared that idea, but it's a matter of actually writing it out and then getting it approved because faculty have their own schedules and you have your own responsibilities. So it's really hard to actually meet up at times or life happens. So one way to do this is by communicating via email or setting a weekly meetup. Some people work better with 2 weeks, others do weekly. Just have some kind of consistency in the way you communicate and contact your faculty. So here on the right, you can see an example where a student might have like a meeting with their faculty. I don't know how long this meeting would be, but you would have this meeting to make sure that you can record the progress, identify any areas that you might have trouble with, but also talk about what good progress has been made and to help validate your understanding and also your learning in this research because this is, again, might not be a topic that you are going to do in the future, but you are still building a lot of those skills that are important to you as a professional. And if you do decide to do research in the future. So, um, again, I being able to identify the deadline and giving your faculty ample time to actually give you feedback can help refine your work to be much cleaner and much more fleshed out. So that is why I suggest having a feedback loop. So having those tentative deadlines, having one or two tasks that you want to focus on and complete by a certain time will be very, very helpful in order to make sure that there is progress being made, even if it's really, really small. And especially if it's your first time writing an abstract, it's really hard, easy to get really overwhelmed. So maybe focusing on like one section at a time, maybe only focusing on on the purpose and then only focusing on the context. So different strategies like that are things you can work on with your faculty mentor as well. And then another aspect of concern that I know with actually just creating an abstract is also getting funded. This is more for discipline specific conferences, not more so for undergraduate conferences. There is funding so very, at least not at the undergrad level, but maybe later on in grad school, you will need to have some kind of funding to support your submissions to these projects, or being able to support you being able to get to the conference if your abstract is accepted. So we do have a couple resources here on campus. So we have beach scholarships, and I think everyone gets this email once a semester, and you can also check. Just the portal, the page itself, if you type beach scholarships, that check out where you can potentially, apply for like scholarship money to help support your academic needs. We also have the Office of Research and Economic Development. And if you look at that website, they offer grants, they offer faculty rewards that they can give their students if they work with them as well. So just different ways to get paid outside of just working, especially if you're working off campus. This is a good way to maybe alleviate some of that financial burden. And then there are research programs for students that are paid here. A couple of the notable ones here, I think more for upper grad, but it's still a chance for like undergrad to check out, is McNair Scholars Program and Build. They basically offer funding for their students to do research by attending the conference and presenting at them. And so they're basically fully covered there. And other future opportunities or other programs that are up and coming are can be listed on the Office of Research and Economic Development's page under student research opportunities. Though I don't think this list is fully updated as of right now, and you can definitely check out some of the webinars that our office holds because they have all of the guest speakers and representatives from the up and coming programs to actually speak up about what they offer students. So here we have some more resources to learn a little bit more about how to write an abstract. So here we have some on-campus resources on the left, which not only include our office where you have the option to work with a peer mentor to get feedback on your resume, cover letter, and also interview tips. But we also have the University Writing Center, which has a much more extensive times of availability. And these are both located in the Student Success Center. So that will be like more in like the middle-ish of campus, like near the Hall of Science. And then the University Library also has their own research tools and catalog, and you can check that out on their website. And they are located a little bit more on the farther end of campus, but they are still a good resource to have. And here we have three off-campus resources that you can check out as well from different universities on additional tips on how to write an abstract if you ever need more information, and more importantly, more examples, because there is no better way to learn than just writing it yourself and referencing other examples just for context. But thank you again for listening. Follow us on our Instagram. Here's our Instagram handle. If you have any questions about this workshop or just about, research in general, feel free to hit up our office with this email. And we have our website, which I linked a little bit earlier, but please follow that because we have different research opportunities for students as well as research services that you can get your hands on if you are more interested. But thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.